Good evening, everyone. This is the Mysterious Bookshops event with James Ellroy.
Yeah.
We'll be getting started momentarily. We're just giving you a few quick seconds if you're washing dishes or folding your laundry or otherwise have your attention away from your computer screen and want to turn back and see what's going on. We'll be getting started.
Give the people time to shoot some duh.
Yes. Well, they don't even need to be since we can't see them. But, at least they can wrap things up to give us their attention. I suppose if you're hearing these words, you will not have missed the beginning, but this interview will live on in the ether of the internet, where it'll be available wherever you're watching now on Facebook and YouTube if you want to rewatch it or if you miss any part of it. And without further ado, it's 6:02. We've given people 2 minutes to give us our attention, so we will formally begin. My name is Tom Wickersham from the Mysterious Bookshop in New York City, and tonight it's my real pleasure to welcome James Ellroy for his new novel, Widespread Panic. Gotta figure out what angle I am. James Ellroy likely needs no introduction to anyone watching this here this evening, but he is the author of numerous novels, including the original LA Quartet, the Underworld USA trilogy, both of which have been reissued in very handsome Everyman's Library editions, as well as available as individual novels. And he's currently working on a new LA Quartet. His previous novel was This Storm, and he has written 2 volumes of memoirs, as well as multiple volumes of collected writings. And he joins us tonight for Widespread Panic. And now, please welcome James Ellroy.
Good evening, peepers, prowlers, pederast pedants, panty sniffers, punks, and pimps. I'm James Ellroy, the death dog with a hog log, the foul owl with a death growl, and the slick trick with the donkey dick. I am the author of 21 books, masterpieces all. They precede all my future masterpieces. These books will leave you reamed, steamed, and dry cleaned, tied, dyed, and swept to the side, screwed, blued, tattooed, and bafangooed. These are books for the whole fucking family. If the name of your family is the Manson family, if each and every one of you buy 1,000 copies of my books tonight, you will be able to have unlimited sex with each and every person on this earth that you desire every night for the rest of your lives. So 1,000. If each and every one of you buy 2,000 copies of my books tonight, you will be able to have unlimited sex with each and every person on this earth that you desire every night for the rest of your lives and still get into heaven as a result of a special dispensation signed by me, the Reverend Ellroy. If each and every one of you buy 3,000 copies of my books tonight, you get the sex, you get into heaven. And for the first time in the history of humankind, crime fiction readers will rule the world. You heard it here first. Off the record, on the QT, and very hush-hush. I'm going to read from my great new novel, Widespread Panic, published by Alfred A. Knopf, home of the bourgeois, the king of American publishers. Cell 2607, Penance Penitentiary, Reckless Wrecker of Lives Block, in Pervert Purgatory, 7/16/2020. I've spent 28 years in this fucking hellhole. Now they tell me I can memoir map my misadventures and write my way out. All that religious shit I disdained and disobeyed has played out true. There's heaven for the good folks and hell for the beastfully bad. There's purgatory for guys like me, caustic cads that capitalized on a sicko system and caused catastrophe. I've sizzled in my sins for 2 decades plus, I've relived my earthly life in dystopian detail. My cunning keepers are currently dangling a deal. Record your jaundiced journey. Trumpet the truth triumphant. Hop to heaven and hit that high note. Baby, it's time to confess. Purgatory is Shitsville. You're stuck with a body you had on earth when you died. You eat nothing but coach class airplane food. There's no booze, no jazzy intrigue, no Wiltshire Will women. Violated victims bop by my cell. They remind me of my many misdeeds and jab me with red hot pokers. Gay gauchos hurtle down from heaven and scold me for outing them back in the homo hate 50s. Yeah, but it was my job. I entrapped soiled celebrities and putzo politicians and cornholed them in confidential. I sold my soul to that maladroit magazine, and now I am sordidly sorry. Yeah, but so what? Sorry's for limp dick losers. Confession salves the savage self and rips it to righteous redemption. Hear my plaintive plea, O watchful world. Get me the fuck out of here. My keepers have poised me with pen and paper. They filed a complete run of confidential. My synapses soar with a million malignant memories. Freddie Otash, 1922 to 1992. I'm a rogue cop, a private eye, a shifty shakedown artist. I'm the demonic deus ex machina of my tattered time and place. I'm the hellhound who held Hollywood captive. I'm the man with the sex-scorched secrets you irksome earthlings have to hear. Confidential presaged the idiot internet. Our gobs of gossip were repugnantly real. Today's blowhard bloggers and their tattle texts, pussy-footing punks all. We stung the studios. We popped the poobahs. We hurled the hurt wholesale. We voyeur vamped America and got her hooked on the shivering shit. We created today's tell-all media culture. We crafted a lurid language and we made it our own. Baby, it's the lexicon of the lowdown. It's the dialogue of the dish. It's the slithering slur and the thrill of the threat. I think and write in algorithmic alliteration. Language must lambaste and lay on the lash. Language liberates as it offends. Confidential taught me that. My confession will make this dizzy dialect divide you in two. There's sin and atonement, fuckers. There's nothing else. Purgatory is a punitive proposition. Montgomery Clift pitchforked me yesterday. Confidential labeled him the Lavender Lilliputian and Princess Tiny Meat. JFK himself followed Monty. I dumped the dish on his dope habit and call girl cavalcade. Marilyn Monroe penance poked me next. Marilyn was a snout trout. She dispensed head to rogue pharmacists, XXX exclusive. They dispensed Snobus Negutol back. Maybe I shouldn't have tattled the tale, but I was within my First Amendment rights. One consumed with candor, and I am racked with recollection. I am revitalized, and I am resurgent. My Meshuggah march down memory lane. begins now. Yeah! I put a spell on you. You ain't nobody's audience but mine.
Well, thank you very much for that reading, James. And so I think for anyone who hasn't read the book, which is only officially released today, or is unfamiliar with its premise, it's a novel, but it's three sort of concurrent novellas of Fred Otash, who was a real-life former LAPD officer, and then Private Eye's confessions as he looks back on his life from purgatory. And he indeed was a real figure. And how well did you know him?
Not well, but I knew him well enough, and I've exploited him in fiction numerous times. I met him in '89 in Miami. He crapped out in '92. He was a sack of shit. He was a bad guy. You don't go around bugging gay bathhouses over the length and breadth of LA, hoping you'll catch a couple of guys doing the bad boogaloo in the steam room and then write out the lurid details in confidential. It's wrong. I wouldn't have done it, Tom, and neither would you. But that was Freddie's stock and trade, entrapment and exposure.
Now, you mentioned, I'm curious to ask a little more about Freddie, but you also mentioned he has indeed appeared in some of your earlier novels, most consequentially in some that take place after the end of Widespread Panic, when he's seen actually sort of assessing or grooming some very prominent assassins to be. I know that you've referenced that you might continue writing more Otash. Is this a separate timeline from those books, or is the Otash of Widespread Panic the same one who we see in the Underworld USA trilogy?
No. The Otash of American Tabloid, The Cold 6000, and Bloods Are Over is differentiated from the largely comedic, satirical, my take on the divided soul American male in mid-century America. This piece, the entire book, Widespread Panic, is a wild-ass riff, and it's more of a Hollywood novel than it is a crime novel or a detective novel. It's satirical, it's parodistic, it's a feast of language, and I have demonized a lot of cultural figures that I despised in the process, and people love this book. It's funny as shit.
I concur, and it's a very rewarding read for. There is many celebrities from Liberace to James Dean who take center stage. There's also many far more obscure real life figures such as William Parker's Hat Squad detectives or Bernie Spindell, who was a prominent wiretapper who wrote his own memoir in the 70s, which is the only reason I know who he is. But there's almost no real life figure who does not come across as just an abhorrent monster in this book. And I wondered how much of that is you embracing the grotesque comedy, or that's you depicting them as you actually view them.
I think Chief Parker comes off well. I think Max Herman, Red Stromwall, Harry Crowder, and Eddie Benson, the LAPD Hat Squad, robbery detectives from 49 to 62, come off well. They only shoot armed robbers, rapists, child molesters, and perverts in the back. And I think due process is a double-edged sword. And I think the motherfuckers that the Hat Squad shoots in the back deserve to get it. And don't forget, Tom, you've got the infamous rapist, Carol Chessman, in this book. And he goes to the green room at San Quentin Prison in the concluding piece.
Oh, are you saying that you did not besmirch Carol Chessman?
Oh, of course I besmirched him.
Yes.
Yeah, but he
But
did it. He did it. He
yeah,
was guilty, and he should have burned.
yes, but as you referenced, even Bill Parker, who was arguably the moral center of the book, sort of the corrective force on Otash's you know, completely destructive path, he is still just explicitly ordering extrajudicial executions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the difference between us is I don't have any problem with it, and you do.
Well, yes, I would go on the record with that.
Yeah, only if they're guilty. That's Helen talking from the background.
Now, stylistically, the book it won't read as too foreign from your previous novels, but part of what's interesting about it is I know that you've said that your highly stylized alliterative style was indeed influenced by Confidential magazine, which Fred Otash was sort of the lead muckraker of for much of its operation. And in many ways, this almost seems like the culmination of a lot of your obsessions, but also returning to the origins of them.
It's very true. I've messed around now for over 30 years with the idea of scandal rag journalism. And from LA Confidential, where I have the muckraker Sid Hudgens, that's one particular alliterative style. The Danny Getchell short stories that I initially published in GQ, that were published in my collections, Crime Wave and Destination Morgue, that's another take on scandal language. This is the most refined alliterative style that I've developed to date. And I'll never go back to it again. It's cumulative, and I'm walking away from it. So the Otash that you see in my next book, he's entirely different. He's serious, he's tragic. He's not this shithead buffoon who veers between lust, murderous rage, abysmal self-pity, and back to lust and rage in the course of one page. It's a take on the 50s, and I'm stuck back there. And I'm having a blast reliving it and recreating a language that I never really heard, that I have invented. At the end of the final Lou Archer trilogy, Archer in Jeopardy, it's the zebra-striped hearse, it's the Doomsters, and it's the Instant Enemy, not MacDonald's best books. He writes, and he was about to go into the fog of Alzheimer's disease. So these might have been the last lucid words that he ever wrote. In the end, I possess my birthplace and am possessed by its language. That's me. I wasn't born in Los Gatos. I didn't grow up in Canada like Ross McDonald. I'm from LA. And if you want to know the secret to why I write what I write, it's the first line of my biography at the back of my books. James Ellroy was born in Los Angeles in 1948.
Now that segues into a few things I wanted to ask you about, which, first of all, your previous novels, your most recent previous novels, certainly This Storm, and I know it was also in Perfidia, have featured segments that were diary entries and otherwise written in prose that would certainly not be considered what people would expect from the James Ellroy character's voice, that reveal that you're quite adept at writing more explicated, what some people might say more normal prose. Are you at all tempted? Is there a character, even if it's still within this milieu of the 50s or crime, where you would abandon some of the stylistic traits you're known for and tell their story in a different style?
I have completely in Bloods Are Over, third book in the Underworld USA trilogy, Perfidia and This Storm, which are the first two books of the second LA Quartet. It is a more explicated but still dense style. There are no tricks. And in Perfidia, I write diary entries from a woman's viewpoint,
Yes.
a very well-educated woman's viewpoint.
Oh no, that's what I was referencing. But even within those novels, I understand where there's a contrast between those and, say, the whole text of White Jazz. But those segments are still written in a very different style, even than the close third person of the rest of those characters' narrative. But
I've never written in omniscient third person. I write in subjective third person. So a good many of my books are three characters, usually male, usually cops, and the voices are differentiated, even though it's he said, she said. There's no I saids in the text. You're seeing everything through the eyes of those three men. In Perfidia and the Storm, I go to 4 viewpoints, and you have Kay Lake's diary in 2 of the books.
yes, no, I mean, I fully acknowledge that. I guess I'm not trying to belabor the point, but that voice is very different, of course, because it's her voice. So I guess I was just asking if there was ever temptation to write something else in such a different voice from your own, even if your own characters are quite distinctive in their close third person.
The story mandates the style always. I want to write books that nobody else would have the nuts to write, would have the stamina to write. My books are 675 pages routinely. The outline for Perfidia was 650 pages. I spend a year on these monstrous outlines because I am determined to be at the place, at the pinnacle, which I believe that I have achieved. I am the ne plus ultra of the American crime novel. I am the greatest crime novelist in the world who ever lived. The hard-boiled novel began with Dashiell Hammett's first book, Red Harvest, a short novel published in 1929. And we go full circle to this book, Widespread Panic, and it's nowhere near as good as the book that will follow it. And I believe it's firmly.
Is the book that will follow
Many
it?
other people do too.
I'm sorry?
I said, I believe it. I'm not shucking and jiving. And a great many other people believe it too.
Well,
Anybody who doesn't believe it can say you're an egomaniac fuckhead and not buy the books, and that's their right.
it might seem like I'm just trying to win favor, but you are preaching to someone who also believes it.
Ah! Tom, where do I send that check, brother?
I forget if I ever, maybe I mentioned this when we first met, but the first time I saw you speak live was in 2009 for Bloods Are Over in Boston. And I was such an admirer, and you seemed a little frustrated by the audience engagement, that they weren't living up to your standards of incisive questions, that I didn't even have you sign my book because I thought, I don't want to screw this up. I'm just going to admire the books. So anyhow, it's
Well, I'm coming to New York in November, and I'll sign all your books.
well, you already have.
We'll go out to dinner again. You, me, Otto, Abby, Andrew Weber. Yeah, Eddie Conlon. What about Eddie Conlon?
Yeah, we'll see if
Your
he's
pal
free.
that you introduced me to.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now,
you sort of look like him.
yeah,
Yeah.
I forget if he's from Boston, but he's at the very least New York Irish, which is essentially Boston.
Yeah, yeah. All you white ethnic motherfuckers, you all look alike to me.
Now, speaking of, I don't know if it's necessarily intimidation, but what you were saying about yourself as the greatest crime novelist who's
Ever lived.
who has a scope of work or as a vision, a scope of vision of their novels I know at least at 2 points, because I was, reading some old interviews with you, as I have previously. There's Don DeLillo's Underworld and John Gregory Dunn's True Confessions are both books where at certain points you felt like they might have precluded you writing books until you either felt confident enough in your ability or a original angle on the material.
Well, it was Don DeLillo's Libra.
I'm sorry, Libra.
The Kennedy hit, largely told from Lee Harvey Oswald's viewpoint. That's one. And John Gregory Dunn's novel, True Confessions. And that's the Black Dahlia case, or a riff on it. And then the third book in this trinity of mine is Compulsion by Meyer Levin, which is a Leopold Loeb killing, Chicago, 1924. And Compulsion and Libra are definitive. There's a lot of wiggle room, or there was a lot of wiggle room in Mr. Dunn's great book, set in a non-existent Irish Catholic LA in the 1940s. When he calls the real life Black Dahlia Elizabeth Short, the Virgin Tramp, and her Square John moniker is Lois Fazenda. It's a very, very fanciful book. And Mr. Dunn himself acknowledges that it's a fanciful portrayal of LA in the 40s. His distance on the material, his determination to write a book about the Catholic Church, I know nothing about. Irishness, I know nothing about, allowed me to write the Black Dahlia from a point of originality. I could never go one-on-one with Compulsion and write about Leopold and Loeb. Meyer Levin, who was a campus contemporary, University of Chicago, of Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, he got there first. It's his crime. Likewise, the great Mr. DeLillo and Libra. Thus, I saw, when I read Libra obsessively several times in 1988, that I could go back to 1958 and chart the harbingers of the Kennedy assassination and write a book wherein Lee Harvey Oswald wouldn't even have to appear. So I got lucky on 2 of those 3 books, but they were the most influential books of mine. And they were all written by so-called mainstream non-crime fiction writers.
Yeah. Before following up on some of those threads and turning back to widespread panic, when I was preparing questions for this, I was reminded of a quote I've always loved, and I must admit I'm ill-equipped to explain more about this person beyond a very surface level. But are you familiar with the Alfred North Whitehead quote, "Moral education is impossible apart from the habitual vision of greatness"?
No, but it's a great quote.
Because it struck me, you're essentially self-taught, and I know they've spoken about your obsession with Beethoven and just absolutely committing yourself to your art and greatness outside of all other pursuits. And I wondered how did you lock on to the things that motivated you or became the anchors towards your passion to achieve what you've achieved?
To begin with, there's the caprice of fate, and there's the oft-told tale of my mother's unsolved 1958 murder. June of 58, I was 10 years old then. And that put me into the world of crime. It put me into the world of crime fiction. It was an unsolved crime. I started to see that there was a world out there that I knew about inchoately as a 10-year-old, and that most people, most adults, and virtually all children could not acknowledge. And that got me reading crime books. And I've been reading crime books now for 63 years. Beethoven and classical music, the romantic canon more than anything else, the world that this one man, Beethoven, created, started in 1960 when I was at John Burroughs Junior High School in LA, and the music appreciation teacher walked over to a bust of a scowling, curly-haired guy who wore the perpetual look of this, and I'll ape it now. Except Beethoven had a lot more hair than I have currently. Whenever Himes, Mr. Himes there, would pass his desk, he'd pat Beethoven on the head. One particular day, it would have been in February of 1960. Eisenhower was still president. Kennedy, a major character of mine in my books, John F. Kennedy, announced for the presidency the previous month. Himes said something like, "Hey kids, dig this." And he had a phonograph joining his desk, and he put the stylus down on the record, and the room burst into dun 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 dun, and I was gone. And it's been Beethoven and me, and the other great composers, to be sure. Classical music, secondarily, jazz. Beethoven and me, though, lo these many decades. And if you have to try to imitate an artist, well, who else is there? In my view, and this is the common Western canonical view, the greatest single genius ever spawned by civilization. He's the big guy. And when you hear it, you know it. Leonard Bernstein has said that the inevitability of the one note, the one note, the one note, reaching to crescendos, caressing you, going to the hearts of pathos, the hearts of this lonely, lonely, benighted man's dreams and his soul. He is, brother, the voice of God. And God, to me, is the only explanation for Beethoven. So, hence, Beethoven. What do I want to be? I want to be the Beethoven of the crime novel. What am I? I'm the Beethoven of the crime novel.
I will say my question's slightly derailed as I digest that. That's what I felt reading your books. I think that there is a certain all-consuming rhythm to the prose where sometimes it's not necessarily such a enlightening or inspiring place when you're slumming with sleazy mafia CIA assets planning drug ripoffs, but there is I see the musical influence or the musical obsession in how your prose has its own rhythm to it that no one else can replicate.
The greatest thing ever said about me came from Joyce Carol Oates, and she said I was the American Dostoevsky. Well, there's your poet of the divided soul. And that's everything that I'm about. So when Freddie Otash at the beginning of Widespread Panic says, there's sin and redemption, there's nothing else, well, that's what I believe.
Now, Freddie Otash, especially the fact that he was a real life character, though obviously this is a highly fictionalized version of him, who I believe earlier in this conversation you may have referred to as a dipshit, but he is still your protagonist. Right. And he is still embodies, the audience can't, the reader can't help but identify with him in that he is at times taking heroic positions, at times is in romantic relationships with women who are quite appealing, but in many ways he does seem like the most or one of the most nakedly opportunistic, promiscuous. It seems like this does feel like a book where there are. It's not that it's without any moral stakes or any consequence, but that you were more just having fun taking us along for the ride.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you hit it right on the snap. He's your divided, mid-century, hard-charging, shit-kicking American man. He's a peeper. He's a voyeur. He's an alcoholic. He's a drug addict. He's a stone hophead. He's promiscuous. He's opportunistic. He's greedy. He embodies the 7 deadly sins. And at his core, he is deeply religious, pious in the extreme. He exists a hair's breadth away from that place where Dave the Enforcer Klein exists at the end of my book, White Jazz, where he breaks down sobbing and confesses his horrifying misdeeds, which are that much more excessively horrifying than anything Freddie Otash does in Widespread Panic.
Quick interruption from my questions. I'll say the audience should feel free to start typing in questions now, and we'll be taking them momentarily. Looping back in, I know that you never like to address explicitly what is real, what is fake in your books. In fact, I'm reminded of something when we were speaking about John Gregory Dunn. I couldn't find the exact quote, but I think you said about True Confessions that it was a novel about Los Angeles that never existed but should have, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And so, people who read the novel, who read Widespread Panic, might be surprised to know that there's quite a lot of truth in it, and that Fred Otash was indeed good friends with James Dean, and they hung out at the supermarket. He knew Liberace, he knew Rock Hudson. Without, saying what is true or false, he was a very well-connected person in the scene. I mean, that can't be denied.
No, Freddie was on, without violating my never tell what's true and what's not rule, I'll tell you that Freddie was on LAPD from 45 to 55, that he was the security boss at the infamous Zoid Hollywood Ranch Market, open all night, 24 hours. He nabbed James Dean shoplifting and made him his stooge. He was the guy you would take your knocked up girlfriend to see if you wanted to get a scrape. He was the guy who would break down the fruit squeeze on the gay movie star. He was the guy who would perpetrate the fruit squeeze on the gay movie star. He played all ends against the middle. He was strictly from Shakedown. That's Freddie. And his great gig was Confidential magazine. He verified the stories. He had LA bars, bathhouses, bistros, bordellos, hot wire dawn to dusk. He had listening posts stashed all over LA. He was the man to know, and he was the man in to know. And he did a lot of very, 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 very bad shit. And I condemn him for it. As I concurrently exploit it and extol the momentary thrills, and they are nothing but momentary, of Freddie's life of sin. I, the Reverend Ellroy, have spoken.
I know that you yourself don't own a computer. You don't necessarily keep up certainly on what's going on the internet and tabloid TMZ journalism. But
Mhm.
of course, that introduction or the introductory passage that you read referenced, bloggers,
Yeah.
modern tabloids. Um, in many ways, when your books in the past have, for instance, the Underworld trilogy, you've written about the behind the scenes players of behind the scenes. In Otash, you're writing about someone who is behind the scenes of revealing what's behind the scenes in a way that is only becoming more and more relevant in the modern age, surveillance state, internet journalism. And I wonder if if this is just purely coincidental. He's obviously a person you knew 30 some years ago, or even if you're writing about the past, you're somewhat influenced by the themes that you see happening in the present.
I know the internet exists. I know people sunder their lives to it. I know that it's a pernicious device of relinquishment. I'm glad that as COVID comes to an end, we can get hooked up to my ex-wife girlfriend's computer. And as a result of you tapping into Helen's computer, we can have this book event and sell some books and keep the book biz and my biz going. So I'm nothing but grateful for that. But I don't write on a computer. I've written all my books by hand. I've never had a cell phone, and I've never used a computer. I don't know how to turn on Helen's TV set. It's so complex.
Well, and then the second part of that being, so you've essentially disavowed all knowledge of the internet, but are there ever, rumblings of what's happening in present that influence the stories you choose to tell, despite them being set in the past?
No.
And I will turn it over to audience questions momentarily, but while I give the audience another opportunity to type their questions, I have to ask, beyond style, would you ever consider writing a book outside of LA and the time period? I know I've been very intrigued by various projects that you've mentioned over the years, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at times I think you've said a novel potentially around the Warren G. Harding administration, kind of Wisconsin State Police, family saga, even something set in Scotland Yard or European World War II espionage. Are any of those still kicking around in your head?
No. I've written 3 enormous novels, the Underworld USA trilogy. They're largely set outside of LA, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Vietnam, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, and various third world disaster zones. I was going to write a book set in the 1920s called Blooming Grove. Blooming Grove was the town where Warren G. Harding came from. Looking into it, I realized the whole story bored me. There is no Wisconsin State Police, I learned. Oops. And Scotland Yard, yeah, I speak English, but that's about as far as it goes. They're just stories that came here and went out there.
All right. Well, we'll take some audience questions
All right,
now.
audience, don't disappoint me.
All right. Well, we'll start with Fabian, who asks, "Hey James, huge fan. According to you, which book? Well, I think you would be the only source on this. According to you, which book will we see next? Book 3 of the new LA Quartet, or a sequel to Widespread Panic?"
Sequel to Widespread Panic. Yeah.
And now, are there plans though to continue the to provide a follow up for this storm?
Oh yeah.
Yes, but more Otash next.
Massive books to complete the second LA Quartet.
Okay. And then a specific question about the second LA Quartet. Pete Bondurant is one of my favorite characters, and will he show up in the new LA Quartet?
No, Mr. Cohen, no, he will not, because when I conceived the second LA Quartet, I went back and read through, for verisimilitude's sake, the original LA Quartet. And Pete Bondurant was off in the Pacific Theater of Operations during World War II. at the time of the second LA Quartet, as much as I would have liked to have used him. But you know that Ward Littell, who is a big character from the first two quartet books, American Tablet and the Cold 6000, he's in Perfidia. Other characters from the trilogy will show up in the two concluding books of the second LA Quartet.
And now Andrew asks, what's your criteria for truth in your novels? What does an actual event have to entail to make it into one of your novels?
Mr. Salmon, when I read it, when I hear it, when it stays up here in my brain and down here in my soul and also down here in my schwanz, when it sticks around and bites me like a piranha fish, well, I'm damn well going to use it. It's an emotional instinct.
Now, I am curious because I may have alluded to this question, but when you, for instance, I would say in the Underworld trilogy, RFK comes off fairly admirably. JFK is largely off page, but in Widespread Panic, he's a bit of a buffoon, and well, to put it mildly. And so, is Widespread Panic in a way its own sort of heightened, again, sort of grotesque, cartoonish Ellroy world, or is it in some ways your true feelings being expressed through fiction?
I'm besotted with Robert F. Kennedy. He's one of my favorite Americans. He's a quintessential American in the manner of Martin Luther King and Ronald Reagan. He, to me, is that big a character. This is his stature. It is not his older brother Jack's stature. Whatever Jack's faults, he was a drug addict, and I'm not the only one who's ratted him out for that. Senator George McGovern, who idolized him, tells a marvelous story of Jack losing his little black bag full of dope during the West Virginia primary of 1960, wherein he had to prove that a Catholic could beat a strong Protestant contender in an all-Protestant state, the Protestant candidate being Hubert Humphrey. And man, the bag went missing, and it was a bad 3 days for Jack until it was recovered. But I see in American Tabloid, you see Robert Kennedy portrayed largely through the eyes of the idealistic FBI man, Ward J. Littell. And Ward J. Littell will have a walk-on in the next Otash book, and Robert F. Kennedy will be portrayed in depth.
Now, Chris asks, most of Mr. Ellroy's books feature characters that are morally compromised, but does he see any of his characters as purely villains?
Yeah, Dudley Smith, who is in a very early book of mine, Clandestine, who is in the 3 concluding books of the first LA Quartet and the first 2 books of the second LA Quartet. Yeah, he's evil.
When you have characters in your books, it seems that the bulk of the protagonists, at least initially, have fairly conservative viewpoints, though you've certainly featured your fair share of women characters who are Asian, African American, gay, communist, otherwise left-leaning, and these characters often are depicted with what would be considered a greater moral character, in that you might be more pleased to have them in your personal life though they sometimes seem to fall victim to their circumstances or become corrupted or otherwise ruined by their idealism.
Yeah, it's very, very true. You have to look at the context. Am I writing about the civil rights movement or opposition to the Vietnam War in the American 1960s? Am I writing about World War II in the American 1940s? Are they foils and romantic figures who live to connect with men? Yes, they are. And the men live to connect with them. And the political divide, the political dialogue is at the heart of what brings them together. And people change. The men change. The men moderate their views. The women moderate their views. The men become radicalized. The women become radicalized. And I see it all as being, in the end, the ineluctable journey of all human beings to know God.
Is that, well, at first I'd be curious to just hear what that means to you, but in a way, is it that you, even though those characters have been sparser in your works or are not necessarily always as readily center stage, do you have a certain admiration for the way that they are not conforming to the society around them, and that or is it a foolish idealism, and that's why they're often corrupted or crushed?
We're all fools, brother, and we're all sinners. And we're all on that razor's edge between sin and atonement. That's all of us. That's the human condition. I am a very, very big believer in original sin. We ate the apple, brother, and that's that. That is the tragic journey of all human beings. Human beings change. That is my moral obligation as a novelist. It is to portray that moment of flux where people start out sinful, heedless, feckless, and move, however tenuously and ambiguously, to the other side. All of my books capture that.
I like thinking about it. So there's always a, so with the exception of Dudley Smith, you would say most of your protagonists, and I would say this scans for Otash too, are in some ways, there is a central goodness or desire for redemption where they are on a journey to better themselves, if just perhaps they're starting from such a deficit or don't have the tools to do that in a way that would necessarily, be recognized by polite society.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll do a few more audience questions. We've got Brian Clark. Is there a real-life historical figure whose life you'd like to explore and incorporate into your work, but you haven't yet? And a follow-up, if you still have an affection for bull terriers.
I don't have any bull terriers, Mr. Clark. Are you a bull terrier man? I'd be curious to know. I love bull terriers. I'm insanely in love with dogs. Pit-type dogs, bull terriers, pit bulls, and hounds in particular. I can't live through the death of another beloved canine. I've had 3 bull terriers. Barco, Barko, Dudley, named after Dudley Smith. He had an evil streak. And Margaret, a red and white bull terrier. And I love dogs. I put paw prints on all the emails that my assistant typed up. Ask Otto. Ask Otto, Tom, about Barco, my bull terrier, and how he ripped the shit out of this beautiful red cashmere sweater I had when I was. Hey, Helen just brought in. Can I hold this up, Helen? Yeah. This is Margaret. Dig, hey, Mr. Clark. Dig, that's Margaret, the bull terrier. You see her?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see her on the other side. Look at her. Hey, Don, yeah, look at those big bat ears. If you are a cat or a rodent, motherfucker, you better run. Because Margaret will grab your ass and maul your ass and kill your ass and eat your ass and shit your ass out under a high bush. She is analogous to the Royal Bengal tiger. Yeah. What she just sees is a candy ass stripedy oversized house cat. Bull terriers. Candy ass. Good. Margaret. There she is. Hey, baby. Yeah.
And now the first part of that question, are there any other specific historical characters that you're planning to introduce into your work or contemplating, if you'll admit it to us?
Yeah, you're going to see them in the new book, and I don't want to give anything away. The new Otash book. Yeah.
And you've got time for just a couple more?
Sure.
All right, so we've got one. Are you reading any current authors?
Mr. Dockney. A typical Ellroy crowd. I mean, no women are asking me questions. Because all these men, they don't have any women in their lives, so they got to sit home and read my books.
It's funny. I think I might know Joe from Boston and possibly Brian Clark, also from Boston.
Yeah, does he have a bull terrier, Clark?
I don't know. Maybe not when I knew him, or it could be a different person, but we'll see.
Okay, what was the question?
Any current authors you're reading?
Otto, as you know, Tom, sells me a shitload of crime books.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been going back and poking my snout into the Kennedy assassination again. And I read Edward J., and that's spelled J-A-Y, Epstein's book, Legend, The Secret World of Lee Harvey Oswald, a book that Mr. Epstein published in 1978. It's all about his connections to intelligence agencies in Russia and here in the United States. In fact, I have on order from Otto one of Mr. Epstein's other Kennedy job related books, Counterplot, the Jim Garrison case. And I've been going back and laughing my ass off reading the Treasury agent novels of my old pal Gerald Pedovich, who, for my money, is the closest thing to the deadpan Dashiell Hammett, the deadpan great Dashiell Hammett, since Dashiell Hammett himself, and undercut with some of the most uproariously funny shit. Funny in a male way that I like to call dog humor. Funny. There's some shit in Jerry's book, To Die in Beverly Hills, that involves a 22-year-old airheaded woman police officer in Beverly Hills posing for a nude Playboy spread, and the spread is called Officers of the Raw. Get it?
Yes, I do.
Funny shit. All of Jerry's books, Live and Die in L.A., The Quality of the Informant, Earth Angels, Paramour. You got to read these books.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I mean, people probably would be most familiar with To Live and Die in L.A. because it was turned into the John Frankenheimer film. But I've only honestly read one of his novels, but it was excellent.
Yeah.
He's due for a rediscovery.
Yeah. Jerry.
And so, we might just do maybe two more.
Sure.
Here, given your relationship with the LAPD, what advice would you have for currently serving law enforcement officers? And then also, thank you for Bloods Are Over. It really struck a chord for me. if this is too present when we are living in the past, that's fine. We can choose another one. But I thought I would.
I'm always thrilled. Mr. Sheffield, thank you very much. I'm guessing, are you on LAPD? It wouldn't surprise me if you are. My best friend is a retired LAPD officer, Glenn Martin, and I dedicated Widespread Panic to him, as well as to Lois Nettleton, the late great Broadway stage actress, television actress, and Freddie Otash's love interest in this book. I'm always moved when people love Bloods Are Over. It's in many ways my most romantic book. And my advice for those currently serving in law enforcement is to stand proudly, toe the line. Every day is a new day, and one has to adhere to my one great maxim about crime in America, and it's this: crime is individual moral default on an epidemic scale, and thus it must be dealt with ad hoc, one crime, one criminal interdiction at a time. And if you're in law enforcement, you probably acknowledge the truth of that statement.
Very quickly, Grant Neville is correct.
Hey, Grant Neville.
Oh, if you know him, yep. Yeah, he was Isaac Frankenheimer. It's William Friedkin. Yep, he's correct. As soon as he said that, I knew it.
Hey, Grant.
Hey,
I'm
Grant.
doing an event with Grant and my friend John Anderson, a woman crime writer named Zoe Dean, and an LA-based writer named Joan Renner out of the same format here.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be a panel of 4 people out of Chevalier's bookstore in LA next week.
So we'll just do one more question, which is a very large question. But,
Wolfgang Leaner. Yeah, Wolfgang. It's been too long. Hey, Helen's right here in the other room, Wolfgang. She says hi.
And so Wolfgang asks, why do you write?
Man, why do I write? I'm thinking. I got to come up with some heavy duty shit. Why do I write? Here it is. In my craft or sullen art, exercised in the still night, when only the moon rages and the lovers lie abed with all their griefs in their arms, I labor by singing light, not for the strut and trade of charms upon the ivory stages, but for the common wages of their most secret heart. Not for the proud man apart do I write on these spindrift pages, but for the lovers, their arms round the griefs of the ages, who pay no praise or wages, nor heed my art or craft. Dylan Thomas. Thank you. God bless you.
Well, thank you so much, James. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And you can order signed copies of the book with our exclusive dog stamp from the Bookshop.
Paw print. Yeah.
Paw print dog stamp. Yes. And yes, the novel was terrific. I had the pleasure of reading it before publication, and as a clearly I'm a big fan, but I don't say it idly. It really was an absolute thrill, and I'm sure everyone who watched tonight will enjoy it thoroughly. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, what's the name of it?